Mr. Dobbins, the board has seen the documents. Your interpretation is incorrect. The voice of Marcy Peltz, president of the Tamarack Estates Homeowners Association, was a marvel of practiced condescension. It was smooth, devoid of any discernible emotion, yet carried a chilling finality, like the quiet click of a vault door locking from the inside. She sat at the center of a long folding table in the community clubhouse, flanked by 4 other board members who stared at some fixed point just above my head, their faces carefully arranged into masks of neutral disinterest. A small brass-looked nameplate in front of her read, Marcy Peltz, President. I stood before them at a solitary lectern, the fluorescent lights of the sterile, beige room humming with an insistent buzz that seemed to drill directly into my temples. On the lectern lay my property survey, a crisp, professionally rendered document that clearly delineated the boundaries of my land. My finger rested on the precise spot, a small, hand-drawn square I had added in red ink. With all due respect, Mrs. Peltz, I began, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. This is not a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of legal record. This is a survey, filed with the county. The line is here. The memorial trellis is here. Well within my property. It is not, and has never been, within the jurisdiction of the Tamarack Estates HOA. Marcy offered a thin, pitying smile. We appreciate your passion, Mr. Dobbins. Truly. However, the board's position, informed by our legal counsel and a review of the governing documents, is that the structure in question falls within the view corridor easement, as described in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, Section 8.4.2. She adjusted her microphone, a small, unnecessary gesture that amplified the soft scrape of her manicured nail against the plastic. The issue has been discussed. The floor is now closed to further comment on this matter. A board member to her right, a man with a perpetually worried expression, cleared his throat. I make a motion to uphold the Architectural Review Committee's finding of violation regarding the unapproved structure on lot adjacent 4B, and to begin levying fines of $100 per day, effective immediately, until the violation is cured. Second, another board member mumbled, her eyes still fixed on the back wall. All in favor? Marcy asked, her gaze sweeping over her colleagues. 4 hands went up in unison. Opposed? She asked. A perfunctory glance in the direction of the 5th board member, a frail, elderly gentleman named Arthur Henderson, who kept his hands folded tightly on the table. His silence was noted, but not recorded. The motion carries 4-0, with 1 abstention. Mr. Dobbins, you will receive formal notification of the board's decision within 3 business days. Thank you for your time. The next item on the agenda is the seasonal color selection for the front entrance planters. And just like that, it was over. I was dismissed. A man rendered irrelevant by a procedural vote. They had looked at my facts, my carefully prepared evidence, and simply declared them void. It was a moment of controlled, procedural humiliation, as cold and efficient as an algorithm. As I gathered my survey, my hands feeling strangely disconnected from my body, I looked at Marcy Peltz. For a fleeting second, her mask of presidential decorum slipped, and I saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, a deep, personal satisfaction. It was the look of a grudge being settled. I just didn't know yet what that grudge was. 2 weeks earlier, the world had been a place of quiet order. My life, since retiring from a 30-year career as a city planner, was governed by the gentle rhythms of sun and season. My modest farmhouse, which sat on 5 acres of land that had been in my family for 3 generations, was my sanctuary. It was bordered on one side by the meticulously manicured lawns of Tamarack Estates, a world of matching mailboxes and enforced aesthetic harmony that I had made sure to remain legally separate from before signing the deed. My days began at sunrise, with a cup of black coffee on the porch, watching the finches and hummingbirds descend upon the feeders. They were a flurry of chaotic energy. Yet even they followed a certain order, a pecking order at the thistlesock, a territorial ballet around the sugar water. I understood and respected that. My life was about creating and maintaining order from the potential for chaos, a skill honed over decades of navigating zoning laws, municipal codes, and public works projects. The heart of my property, and of my life, was the garden. It was Eleanor's garden. My late wife had poured her soul into that half-acre plot, transforming it from a patch of stubborn clay into a vibrant tapestry of perennial blooms, heirloom vegetables, and fragrant herbs. Since her passing 2 years ago, tending to it had become my solemn, sacred duty. Weeding the beds, pruning the roses, turning the compost, these were not chores, but conversations with her memory. The scent of tomato leaves on my fingers was her scent. The resilience of the echinacea after a storm was her resilience. This past spring, I had decided to build her a proper memorial within the garden. Not a somber stone, but something living. I designed a simple but elegant cedar trellis, an archway that would soon be covered in the climbing roses she had loved most, the ones she called blaze of glory. I dug the footings myself, mixed the concrete by hand, and set each post with a level, ensuring it was perfectly plumb. I spent a week cutting and joining the lattice, the scent of fresh-cut cedar filling my workshop. It was more than a structure. It was an act of love, a final piece of architecture in a life I had shared with her. It stood at the southern edge of the garden, a beautiful frame for the setting sun. It was my private tribute on my private land, a quiet statement of devotion meant for an audience of one. It's beautiful, Neil. Eleanor would have loved it. Sarah Jenkins, my neighbor from just inside the HOA's border, stood by my fence, her golden retriever, Buddy, panting happily at her side. Sarah was a kind soul, a kindergarten teacher with a perpetually optimistic outlook on life. She was also my primary source of information about the inner workings of Tamarack Estates. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, wiping sawdust from my hands onto my jeans. "I think so too." She hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. I hope it doesn't cause you any trouble." I leaned against a fence post. "Trouble, it's a garden trellis, Sarah, and it's a good 30 feet on my side of the property line." I know, she said quickly, tossing a stick for Buddy. "It's just Marcy Peltz. She's intense since she became president. It's been a constant stream of new rules. Mailbox flags have to be down by 6 p.m. Holiday decorations can't go up until after Thanksgiving. The Finches got a violation notice because their son's basketball hoop was visible from the street." I sighed. I'd heard the stories. Marcy Peltz had swept into the presidency 18 months ago on a platform of protecting our property values. Her reign, from what I could gather, was characterized by a zealous and often arbitrary enforcement of the community's covenants. "Well," I said, giving the trellis a final, satisfied look, "thankfully, her authority ends at that property stake right there. I have my survey. I value order and rules, Sarah, but I also value jurisdiction. She has none here." Sarah nodded, though the worry didn't entirely leave her eyes. "I hope you're right, Neil. I really do." We chatted for a few more minutes about the weather and her plans for the school year before she and Buddy continued on their walk. I returned to my work, the conversation fading from my mind. I was a man of documents, of plats and surveys, of clearly defined lines. I had my paperwork. I was safe. I believed, with the sincere conviction of a man who had spent his entire career upholding the sanctity of such things, that the facts would protect me. It was a faith that was about to be profoundly and formally tested. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered not by the regular mail carrier, but by a certified mail courier who required my signature on a small electronic device. It was a crisp, business-sized envelope, bearing the logo of Prestige Community Management, the firm that handled the day-to-day operations for the Tamarack Estates HOA. My name and address were printed in a sharp, impersonal font. The return address was a P.O. box in a neighboring city. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Certified mail was never good news. It was the delivery method of choice for legal notices, tax audits, and jury summonses. It was communication that demanded to be acknowledged, that could not be ignored or claimed as lost. I signed the screen and took the envelope. Inside my kitchen, I slid it open with a butter knife. The letterhead was heavy, expensive bond paper, also branded with the Prestige logo. The text was brief and chillingly polite. Formal notice of violation. Date, September 12, 2023. Certified mail tracking, Nesher 9405, 5036, 9930, 0341, 5829, 17. To Neil Dobbins, owner, property lot adjacent, 4B, unincorporated county. Dear Mr. Dobbins, this letter serves as formal notification that a violation of the Tamarack Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, has been observed. A recent inspection by the Architectural Review Committee ARC has identified an unapproved structure, a wooden trellis, archway, erected in the view corridor easement area. This is in direct violation of CC&R, Figure 8.4.2, View Corridor Protections. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain, which may damage or interfere with any established easement for the installation or maintenance of utilities, or which may unreasonably change, obstruct, or retard the view from any lot or common area. As per the governing documents, you are required to cure this violation by dismantling and removing the unapproved structure within 30 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in further enforcement action by the Board of Directors, which may include monetary fines and the levying of a lien against the property. Sincerely, the Tamarack Estates Board of Directors, CIO Prestige Community Management. I read the letter 3 times. My initial unease hardened into a cold, quiet anger. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an assertion of power, a deliberate overreach. They had cited a specific clause, wrapped their demand in the sterile language of legal procedure, and mailed it with a tracking number. They were building a case. I walked out to the back porch, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. From there, I could see the trellis, standing proudly at the edge of Eleanor's garden. It was a thing of beauty and memory, and they had just called it a violation. They had taken my tribute to my wife and reduced it to an item on an inspection checklist, an unapproved structure that needed to be cured. My mind, the orderly, procedural mind of a city planner, began to work. This was no different from a developer trying to bend a zoning ordinance or a contractor attempting to bypass a building code. The response had to be the same: methodical, factual, and based entirely on the documents. I went to my office and pulled out the thick 3-ring binder I'd received at my property closing, the one filled with every conceivable piece of paperwork related to my land: title report, deed, inspection results, and my official, stamped property survey. I also found the Good Neighbor packet the developer of Tamarack Estates had sent me years ago, which included a complimentary copy of their CC&Rs. I turned to Section 8, Article 4, Clause 2. There it was, in black and white. View corridor protections. The language was broad, almost intentionally vague, unreasonably change, obstruct, or retard the view. But the opening phrase was the key: damage or interfere with any established easement. They were claiming the trellis was in an easement. My survey, however, showed no such thing on the southern part of my property. I spread the large document across my desk. The surveyor's marks were unequivocal. The property line was a solid, bold stroke. My garden, and the trellis within it, were located squarely and entirely on my private lot. Their claim had no factual basis. This was a simple matter, I told myself. A bureaucratic error amplified by an overzealous board president. All it would take to resolve it was a clear, polite presentation of the facts. My belief in the power of reason lasted exactly 6 days. That was how long it took for Prestige Community Management to respond to the letter I had so carefully crafted. My own letter had been a model of civility and precision. I had addressed it to the board of directors, care of the management company. I acknowledged receipt of their notice. Citing the certified mail tracking number, I stated, politely but firmly, that they were operating under a misapprehension. The core of my letter was a simple, declarative statement. The structure in question is not located within any easement of record, nor is it located on property under the jurisdiction of the Tamarack Estates HOA. To support this, I enclosed a high-quality, color copy of my official property survey, on which I had highlighted my property lines in yellow and marked the location of the trellis with a prominent red X. I even included a photograph of the trellis, taken from the HOA's common area, to demonstrate that it did not unreasonably obstruct any significant view. I concluded by stating that I now considered the matter closed. I sent it via certified mail, creating my own paper trail. I expected a letter of apology, or, at the very least, a quiet dropping of the issue. What I received was another crisp, formal envelope. Inside was not an apology, but a summons. Dear Mr. Dobbins, the Board of Directors is in receipt of your correspondence dated September 20th, 2023. Your position has been noted. Please be advised that you are hereby required to attend a formal hearing with the Board of Directors to discuss the ongoing violation of CC&R 48.4.2. The hearing is scheduled for date Tuesday, October 4th, 2023, time 7:00 p.m. Location, Tamarack Estates, Clubhouse, 125, Tamarack Circle. You will be allotted 5 minutes to present your case. Please be prepared to answer questions from the board. Failure to attend will result in a decision being made in your absence. Sincerely, the Tamarack Estates Board of Directors. The letter was a punch to the gut. They hadn't just ignored my evidence, they had escalated the situation, transforming it from a dispute over documents into a formal tribunal where I was the defendant. My carefully constructed argument, my appeal to logic and fact, had been met with a terse, bureaucratic command: appear before us. The 5-minute time limit was a calculated insult, a clear signal that they had no intention of engaging in a good-faith discussion. The cold anger I had felt before now began to mix with a sense of dread. This was no longer a simple mistake. A mistake could be corrected with a polite letter and a map. This was deliberate. This was personal. Sarah's warning about Marcy Peltz echoed in my mind. An intense president who fined people over basketball hoops would not be swayed by a property survey. She was a petty tyrant, and for reasons I couldn't yet fathom. She had chosen my wife's memorial as her next target. I sat at my kitchen table, the summons lying next to my copy of the survey. The lines on the paper were still clear, the facts unchanged. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the facts were no longer enough. If I was going to defend Eleanor's garden, I couldn't just be right. I had to be armed. The first call I made was to David Chen. We had started in the city planning department on the same day 30 years ago and had retired within 6 months of each other. David was the best municipal researcher I had ever known. A man who could navigate the labyrinthine archives of the county recorder's office like it was his own personal library. He possessed a deep and abiding love for the immutable truth of public records. "A view corridor easement," David said over the phone, a note of academic curiosity in his voice. "Interesting. Those can be tricky, but they have to be recorded on the plat map. It's not something they can just invent." "That's what I thought," I said, pacing my office. "My survey is clean." "A personal survey is good, Neil. But for something like this, you need the original source, the recorded subdivision plat map. That's the master document. Everything defers to it. Let's go pull it." 2 days later, David and I were standing at a wide counter in the county records department, a place that smelled of old paper and dust. A clerk wheeled out a massive, heavy book and opened it to a map that was nearly 3 feet wide. It was the original plat map for Tamarack Estates. Phase 1. David's finger, practiced and sure, traced the lines of the development. "Okay, here's the subdivision boundary," he said, his voice low. "And here's your parcel, marked not a part of this subdivision." He then traced the faint, dotted lines that crisscrossed the map. "These are your easements. See utility easement here along the road, drainage easement at the back, standard stuff." He paused, his finger hovering over the northern edge of my property, the side furthest from my garden. "Ah, there it is." I leaned in closer. A faint, dotted line was drawn about 10 feet inside my property line on the north side, with a small, almost microscopic notation next to it, 10V CE, Viewcore, ease. "It's on the north side of your property." "Neil," David said, looking up at me. "And look where it's aligned." He pointed to a large green-shaded area on the HOA's side of the map, labeled Common Area Park. From that park, looking north across that specific corner of my land, one could see a sliver of a distant lake. The easement is there to protect the view of the lake from their park. Your garden and the trellis are on the south side. They're not even close. It was a staggering discovery. They weren't just misinterpreting a rule. They were trying to apply an easement from one side of my property to the complete opposite side. "But that's not all," David said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. "The plat map only shows where it is. To know what it's for, we need the easement deed itself." He scribbled the instrument number on a request slip. 20 minutes later, we were looking at a copy of the deed, a dense, legalistic document filed by the original developer. David scanned it quickly, his finger flying down the page. He stopped at a paragraph in the middle. "Got it," he said. Tapping the paper, he read aloud, "Said easement is granted for the sole purpose of ingress and egress for the installation, maintenance, and repair of public and private utilities, including, but not limited to water, sewer, electric, and communications lines. No permanent structures shall be erected by the grantor within this easement without prior written consent of the grantee." He looked up at me, a grim smile on his face. "It's a utility easement. Neil, that's it. The view corridor label on the plat map is aspirational at best. Probably something the developer's marketing team came up with. The legal document, the deed that actually grants the right, says nothing about protecting a view. Its only purpose is to let a utility truck get to a transformer box. They have no legal leg to stand on. None. The evidence was irrefutable. Marcy Peltz was not just mistaken. She had to know this. She was deliberately misrepresenting the governing documents in a targeted campaign of harassment. My next step was to understand the HOA's internal process. That evening, I drafted a formal request under the state's Common Interest Development Act, which gives homeowners, and by extension, adjacent property owners in a dispute, the right to inspect certain association records. I requested copies of the Board of Directors meeting minutes for the past 18 months, specifically any minutes pertaining to architectural changes, perimeter enhancements, or enforcement actions related to view obstructions. I sent it, as always, via certified mail. The packet arrived a week later. It was a thick stack of photocopied pages held together by a single, strained staple. I sat down with a cup of coffee and began to read. It was a tedious journey through approvals for new paint colors, debates over pet waste policies, and budget reports for pool maintenance. Then I found it. In the minutes from a meeting 3 months ago, under new business. President Peltz raised a concern regarding an unapproved structure being built on an adjacent property that negatively impacts the aesthetic harmony of the community perimeter and potentially violates the View Corridor Easement CC&R Figure 8.4.2. I read on, my heart beginning to pound. The next few lines detailed a discussion. The management company representative, a Ms. Gable, was noted as advising caution. She recommended a legal opinion be sought before taking any action, given the property was outside the HOA's boundaries. The next page, however, was where the truth lay hidden, or rather, where it was deliberately concealed. A full paragraph, detailing the board's subsequent discussion and resolution, was completely blacked out with a thick, dark marker. It was a crude, heavy-handed redaction. I held the page up to the light, but the ink was absolute. It was a black hole in the official record, right where the decision to come after me was made. I dropped the pages onto my desk. The pieces clicked into place. The out-of-place easement, the utility-only deed, the redacted minutes. This wasn't a bureaucratic fumble. This was a conspiracy. Marcy Peltz had pushed this through, likely over the objections of her own management company. And then she had covered her tracks. I now knew I was right. I had the documents to prove it. But I also knew something far more chilling. My opponent wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She was a bully who was willing to break them, and then hide the evidence. And she was coming for me. The hearing was exactly what I expected a show trial. My 5 minutes were a formality. A box for Marcy to check on her procedural list. The board's decision, delivered with that icy politeness, felt preordained. 3 days after that humiliating meeting, the official notice arrived. It was printed on the same heavy bond paper, with the same impersonal font. But this letter felt different. It felt heavier. Notice of fine and intent to lien. Dear Mr. Dobbins, this letter serves as official notification of the Board of Directors' decision following the hearing on October 4, 2023. The Board voted to find you in violation of CC&R Figure 8.4.2 for the continued presence of an unapproved structure within the View Corridor Easement. Pursuant to the authority granted in the governing documents, a fine of $100 per day will be levied until the violation is cured through the complete removal of the structure. These fines commenced on October 5, 2023. Please be advised that any unpaid fines and associated administrative fees will constitute a debt. If this debt remains unpaid for a period of 60 days, the Tamarack Estates HOA will file a Notice of Delinquent Assessment lien against the property with the County Recorder's Office to secure its interest. The words leaped off the page. $100 per day. Intent to lien. This was no longer a theoretical dispute about maps and rules. This was a direct threat to my financial security, to the home my family had owned for generations. A lien could cloud my title, wreck my credit, and, if left unchallenged, could theoretically lead to foreclosure proceedings. They were threatening to take my home over a memorial to my wife. The weight of it settled on me, a physical pressure in my chest. For the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt. The legal battle to fight this would be expensive and draining. The stress was already a constant, unwelcome companion, robbing me of sleep and souring the simple peace I had worked so hard to build. That evening, Sarah stopped by on her walk. She saw the notice on my kitchen counter, and her face fell. "Oh, Neil," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "This is insane. They can't do this." "Apparently. They think they can," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fight it." She looked at me, her eyes filled with genuine concern for her friend. How a lawyer will cost thousands. These things can drag on for years. They have the HOA's entire budget to pay their attorneys. You just have your retirement savings." She took a deep breath. "Neil, maybe you should just take it down." The words hung in the air between us. She was saying it out of kindness, out of a desire to protect me from a costly and painful fight. She was the voice of reason, of pragmatism, of conformity. "It's not worth it. Just give in. Let the bully win." "It's just a trellis," she added softly. "You can build another one somewhere else in the garden." "It's not just a trellis." "Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And it's not about the money. They are wrong. What they are doing is an abuse of power. If I let them do this to me, who's next? The Finches and their basketball hoop. Some family who plants the wrong color of petunias. This is about principle." She saw the resolve in my eyes and nodded slowly. "I understand. I just worry about you." After she left, I stood on the back porch, staring at the trellis as dusk settled over the garden. Her words had shaken me more than I let on. Was I being stubborn? Was I sacrificing my peace and my savings for a principle that no one else cared about? The loneliness of the fight felt immense. Just as I was about to go inside, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Arthur Henderson, the quiet, elderly board member who had abstained from the vote. He got out of his old, impeccably maintained sedan and walked slowly toward me. "Mr. Dobbins," he said, his voice a frail but steady baritone. "Forgive the intrusion." "Not at all. Mr. Henderson, please." He stood beside me at the railing, his gaze also fixed on the garden. He was a retired history professor, a man who had lived in Tamarack Estates since it was built. He was respected, part of the community's old guard. "That's a fine structure," he said, nodding toward the trellis. "For your wife, I presume." "Yes, sir, for Eleanor." We stood in silence for a long moment. Then, he turned to me, his eyes clear and direct. "What Marcy is doing is wrong, deeply wrong. A few of us on the board see it, but we are hesitant to challenge her directly. She can be quite vindictive." He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "She controls the agenda. She controls the management company. It's hard to fight from the inside." He reached into the breast pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. I was the board secretary at that meeting 3 months ago. He said quietly, I take my own notes. I unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of a page from a stenopad, filled with neat, cursive handwriting. It was his handwritten minutes from the meeting. There, in the middle of the page, was the section that had been blacked out in the official version. Discussion followed re-adjacent property trellis. Ms. Gable Prestige, MGMT, advised that plat map and easement deed do not support a view obstruction claim. Easement is for utility access on north boundary only. Legal counsel confirms HOA has no jurisdiction. President Peltz overruled, stating the spirit of the covenants and community harmony must be protected. Instructed MGMT Co. to proceed with violation notice. Citing Burger 8.4.2. Motion by Peltz. Second by Miller. Passed 4-1. Henderson opposed. It was the smoking gun, a written record, in the secretary's own hand, that Marcy had been explicitly warned by both her management company and her lawyers that she had no case. She knew her claim was fraudulent, and she did it anyway. She forced a new vote to approve the official redacted minutes at the next meeting. Mr. Henderson explained, claimed the discussion was protected by attorney-client privilege. It was nonsense. But again, no one would stand up to her. He looked at me, a sense of purpose hardening his gentle features. The annual homeowners meeting is in 2 weeks, on October 30th. It's an open forum. She can't control the agenda as easily. Many of us are counting on you. Mr. Dobbins, don't back down. He patted my arm, gave me a small, encouraging nod, and walked back to his car. I stood there, holding his notes in my hand. The crisp paper, a tangible piece of truth. The doubt and fear that had plagued me evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. My crisis of principle was over. Sarah was wrong. It wasn't just a trellis, and Mr. Henderson was right. I couldn't back down. The Tamarack Estates clubhouse was packed for the annual meeting. Every one of the 75 stacking chairs was filled, and a dozen or so homeowners stood along the back wall. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban discontent. An agenda, printed on a large poster board, stood on an easel near the entrance. At the bottom, a heading read, Homeowner Comments, 5-minute time limit per household strictly enforced. Marcy Peltz sat at the head table, radiating an aura of absolute control. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a small wooden gavel. She moved through the opening items, the approval of last year's minutes, the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee's update with brisk, unsmiling efficiency. Beside the projector screen at the front of the room, a large digital clock had been set up, its red numerals glowing ominously, U5, Shu0. Finally, she arrived at the last item. We will now open the floor to homeowner comments. As a reminder, each speaker will have 5 minutes. The time will be kept strictly to ensure everyone has an opportunity. We will begin the timer when you reach the lectern. Who would like to speak first? Several hands went up to complain about overflowing pet waste stations and cracks in the tennis court surface. I waited. I wanted to go last, or close to it. I watched as each speaker approached the lectern, and as soon as they began, Marcy would nod to a board member, who would press a button. The countdown would begin. She would often cut speakers off mid-sentence with a polite but firm, "Thank you. Your time is up." It was a masterclass in controlled discourse. After about 20 minutes, she looked out at the dwindling number of raised hands. Anyone else? I raised my hand. "The gentleman in the back," she said, her eyes betraying nothing. "Please state your name for the record." I walked to the front of the room and placed my slim leather briefcase on the lectern. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, but my hands were steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. "My name is Neil Dobbins," I said, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone. As I spoke my name, Marcy nodded to the timekeeper. The clock started. 04:59, 04:58. I live on the property adjacent to Tamarack Estates. I began. Many of you know of the ongoing dispute I have with the board of directors regarding a trellis in my wife's memorial garden. I could feel a ripple of recognition move through the room. I am here tonight to present the facts of this case. I have provided the meeting secretary with a set of documents, and I will now project them for everyone to see. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket and inserted it into the laptop connected to the projector. The first image flashed onto the screen. Time 04:30. "This," I said, using a laser pointer to circle the text, "is the formal violation notice I received from the board. It alleges a violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2, claiming my trellis is in something called a view corridor easement." I clicked to the next slide. Time 03:30. The screen now showed the official recorded county plat map for Tamarack Estates. This is the official plat map for this development, a public record available to anyone. As you can see, my property is clearly marked not a part of this subdivision. More importantly, the only view corridor easement mentioned on this map is located here. My laser pointer drew a line along the northern edge of my land to protect the view of the lake from your common area park. My garden and the trellis are located here. The red dot moved to the southern edge of my property, hundreds of feet away. A low murmur spread through the audience. People were shifting in their seats, leaning forward. Marcy's face remained a stony mask. "So, the board is attempting to enforce an easement on the wrong side of my property." I continued calmly. "But the question remains, what is that easement even for?" I clicked again. Time 02:30. The dense, legal text of the recorded easement deed appeared on the screen. I had highlighted the relevant section in yellow. This is the legally binding deed that created the easement. It states, and I quote, "Its sole purpose is for ingress and egress for the installation, maintenance, and repair of utilities." It says nothing about protecting a view. The board's entire claim is based on a fraudulent interpretation of two public documents. The murmuring grew louder. Someone in the front row turned and stared directly at Marcy. She gripped her gavel, her knuckles white. "A simple mistake. Perhaps," I asked rhetorically. "A misunderstanding." That's what I thought at first. Which is why I requested the minutes from the board meeting where this action was initiated. I clicked to the next slide. Time 01:30. The screen showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the page from the official minutes I had received, with the large, blacked-out paragraph. On the right was a clear image of Mr. Henderson's handwritten notes for the same section. I read his notes aloud. "Ms. Gable of Prestige Management advised that plat map and easement deed do not support a view obstruction claim. Legal counsel confirms HOA has no jurisdiction. President Peltz overruled, instructed management company to proceed with violation notice." The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector. I had just shown them, with irrefutable proof, that their president had been explicitly told her actions were legally baseless, and she had proceeded anyway, then concealed the record of that warning. "This was never about a trellis or a view," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in for the final reveal. "It was about a grudge." I clicked to the final slide. Time 0045. It was a scanned copy of a newspaper article from 12 years ago. The headline read, City Planning Commission denies zoning variance for controversial Peltz Plaza development. A younger-looking Marcy Peltz stood beside her husband, her face a mask of fury. My own photo, a bland headshot from my time with the city, was in the corner. 12 years ago, in my capacity as a senior city planner, I was the lead analyst on a project proposed by Mrs. Peltz's husband. My objective review found that the project failed to meet multiple municipal codes and zoning requirements. Based on my report, the commission voted to deny the variance, a decision that resulted in a significant financial loss for the Peltz family. I was just doing my job. But Mrs. Peltz, it seems, has a long memory. I turned to look directly at her. Her face was ashen. The mask of control had shattered, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. I could see her whisper something to the board member next to her, though I couldn't hear it. I could read her lips. He ruined us. The timer on the screen glowed. Wow 32. Wow 031. I had laid out the facts, exposed the lie, and revealed the motive. My case was complete. The silence in the room broke not with a shout, but with a tidal wave of angry whispers. Homeowners turned to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage. The carefully maintained facade of suburban tranquility had been torn away, revealing the ugly machinery of a personal vendetta operating under the guise of community governance. A man in the third row, Mr. Finch, the owner of the offending basketball hoop, stood up. "I'd like to make a motion," he said, his voice ringing with indignation. "I move that all fines and pending actions against Mr. Dobbins be immediately and retroactively voided. And I further move that the board formally censure President Marcy Peltz for malicious and selective enforcement of the covenants." Second, a woman called out from the back. Marcy, recovering slightly, banged her gavel. "That motion is out of order. This is the homeowner comment period, not a business session." But it was too late. The dam had broken. People were on their feet, demanding the motion be heard. The board members beside Marcy looked terrified, glancing from the angry crowd to their disgraced president. As the chaos swirled, my eyes landed on a young family sitting near the front. The parents looked exhausted, the way parents of small children often do. I recognized them from around the neighborhood. I also remembered Sarah telling me about their violation, a small, brightly colored plastic playset in their backyard, barely visible over their fence. They had been fined repeatedly by Marcy because, she claimed, its primary colors disrupted the natural earth tone palette of the community. The timer on the screen still glowed U028, U027. I still had the floor. I could have used that time to press my advantage, to hammer home Marcy's corruption. But looking at that family, at the quiet desperation on their faces, I realized my victory would be hollow if it was only for me. My fight, I had told Sarah, was about principle. Now was the time to prove it. I stepped back to the microphone, raising my hand for quiet. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "If I may, I still have 20 seconds remaining." The room gradually fell quiet again, all eyes on me. "Mr. Finch's motion is a good one," I said clearly, "but I don't believe it goes far enough. This isn't just about my property. It's about a pattern of behavior. It's about fair process for everyone." I looked directly at the young family. I asked that the motion be amended to include a full, independent audit of all fines and architectural violations issued in the past 18 months, to be conducted by an outside firm. A wave of applause swept the room. Mr. Finch grinned and shouted, "I accept that amendment." The woman who had seconded the motion did the same. The will of the community was now a unified force. Mr. Henderson, seeing his moment, formally called for a vote on the amended motion. It passed with a thunderous chorus of ayes. Marcy Peltz sat in stunned silence, her gavel forgotten. Her reign was over. Weeks later, a thick envelope arrived from the new interim board of Tamarack Estates. Mr. Henderson had been unanimously voted in as the interim president, tasked with restoring order and transparency. Inside the envelope was a letter formally apologizing for the actions of the previous board and confirming that all fines against me had been expunged. But there was also a second document, a summary of the independent audit's findings. The final surprise was more sordid than I could have imagined. My ordeal was not Marcy's only abuse of power. The audit had uncovered a clear pattern of financial self-dealing. Dozens of minor selectively enforced violations around the community perimeter, like the Finch's basketball hoop and the Young Family's playset, had resulted in the board demanding that homeowners install expensive new landscaping to screen the violations. Every single one of those mandatory landscaping contracts, totaling tens of thousands of dollars, had been awarded without a bidding process to a company called Perfect Perimeters Landscaping. The owner of that company was Todd Nowak, Marcy Peltz's brother-in-law. She had been using her power not just to settle an old score, but to enrich her own family. The new board, with Mr. Henderson at the helm, was working with legal counsel to pursue restitution from Marcy and her brother-in-law. They also invited me to help them draft a new, clear, and transparent architectural review policy, one with checks and balances to prevent such abuses from ever happening again. I accepted. This evening, the air is cool and crisp with the promise of autumn. I am sitting on my back porch, a cup of tea warming my hands. Before me, Eleanor's garden is settling in for the fall. The climbing roses have begun their ascent up the cedar trellis, their green tendrils wrapping around the wood. It stands not as a monument to a fight, but as a testament to what it was always meant to be: a quiet, beautiful, and enduring symbol of love. I had fought for my peace, and, in doing so, had helped restore the integrity of an entire community. The low sun catches the wood grain, and for a moment, the trellis seems to glow. The order I so valued had been threatened, but in the end, through facts, persistence, and a belief in principle, it had been restored.